Now, a couple of days ago, I put something out on Facebook showing a ton of economic data that shows that it looks like there's a massive implosion of the economy coming in, and most of it stemming specifically from the Chinese economy. Okay, now what's going on? Now, the problem is with stuff like this, it can be incredibly complicated. It's not something a layperson is going to understand. It requires a lot of knowledge in particular fields in how certain markets interact with each other. So I'm going to put this in a very simple way. China's economy, and by extension the world's, was hit really bad last week. Commodity prices and stock markets around the world tumbled, and the S&P 500 fell by 4.9% this year, its worst 4-day operating run in history. Newly released figure from the China Labor Bureau reveals that the number of strikes and workers' protests dramatically increased at the end of 2015, particularly in manufacturing, construction, and mining, the main economic engines of the Chinese economy. As a result, the labor costs for big firms have tripled, encroaching upon and often flattening profit margins. China's working population has shrunk by 3.5 million. Many economists, even in the IMF, state that China, they're reaching the point of labor scarcity, the so-called Lewis turning point, an inevitable development phase where wages surge sharply, industrial profits are squeezed, with a steep fall in investment. In other words, their problem is straight-up capitalism. What the Chinese capitalism with Chinese characteristics has done is develop. And now that it's completely driven itself into a full-on capitalist system, it's suffering the same problems that the United States and the West suffered decades ago. It's just straight up the regular consequences of having done capitalism. People are striking for higher wages. Higher wages are leading to stronger, more powerful unions, and those are interfering with the profits. As I said, they're getting lower rates of profit coming back, which of course is a part of crisis in capitalism, according to Marx, the falling rate of profit. So what happens? Essentially, China now has to start exporting labor. That's right, the place where the West goes to get cheaper labor now has to send labor cheaper out itself. So understand that, because that's part of how the global economy grows. That's part of the expansion of capitalism across the entire world. So first we had the union attacking, bashing, trying to dismantle it, etc. Then we had NAFTA sending those jobs to Mexico where the cheaper labor is. Then China got opened up. So now they started sending labor to China, and then places like Bangladesh, Taiwan, Honduras, places like that. Now that main hub has been China. Now China's starting to get too expensive because their economy is now starting to come up. There's a rise of a middle class that's demanding certain rights, that are now engaging in labor activism. And soon a very similar thing may be happening to India. Now, while they can't really shift this much manufacturing to India all at once, because that would cause a disruption in the flow of commodities. In other words, the circulation of commodities in the economy. But what's important here is that we are reaching another barrier to the expansion of the market. China was almost pretty much the final frontier, that and India. So what happens? Now China itself has to start exporting labor. It has to start looking for other places to find labor. Now, where do the Chinese go when they want cheap labor? The DPRK, the special economic zones. Now, ask yourself this: what's going on in the DPRK right now? Extremely aggressive war postures. What happens when there's serious conflicts between the South and the North? Special economic zones get shut down. Instability grows in the region as a result. It becomes a question of, well, the special economic zone that I outsource my labor to, is that going to get, bombed by the United States in the next couple of months? In other words, it creates great uncertainty among investors. Investors who then react in the market, say a huge amount of instability in the Chinese market, which we just saw a couple of days ago. And given the importance of the Chinese market in the world, it has a drip down effect. Now, keep in mind that these aren't the only things that affect the market globally. There's also things like a ton of junk bonds are going around. Finance capital is again expanding beyond its limits. A fictitious capital produced ahead of the actual creation of real value is also becoming a problem once again. In other words, very similar to what happened to the subprime mortgage crisis right before the Great Recession. What we're really seeing here, and what's very significant, is that the limits of capital are being challenged once again. Capitalism has spread to almost absolutely every single corner of the world. The problem is now the only place really left to go is either the DPRK or Africa. And Africa is far too unstable in most parts for this kind of activity. Now, keep in mind, what happens once this expansion reaches all of Africa? Where's there left to go? There isn't. And that will be once capitalism has completely crossed the entire globe with nowhere else left to go. And that could very well signal the end of the capitalist system, because a whole system predicated on inequality that must constantly expand in order to function will have reached its limits. But what's really interesting to me here is to acknowledge that the turn towards capitalism that began with the actions of Deng Xiaoping are now finally having its full effect. The path of going down capitalism has now caused China to go into the same kind of problems, barriers that all capitalist countries have. And meanwhile, there's people who claim that the DPRK is still socialist. If it were socialist, why is it coming up against these capitalist barriers? Very obvious capitalist barriers. What we may see after this is China start to become more of an imperialist power, because it's not going to have a choice. If it wants its economy to survive, it's going to have to start becoming imperialist, just like every other capitalist country has. Because that's the way it has to go. That is the logic of capital, and that's how it survives. So I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind here. Because this situation is far from over, and where it goes, it should be pretty interesting. If you like this video and you'd like to see more of them, then head over to my Patreon page and show your support. Or you can go to the MRN bookstore and check out some of the latest books available. Don't forget to rate, comment, subscribe, and share on various social media.